if this shit works. Dun, 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 dun. I think everything's working okay. I just added a whole bunch of stuff to the stream, so you can now redeem channel points known as midichlorians. Just like this. It plays sounds. Now let me know you guys heard that sound. Because I heard it when it went off. But I'm not 100% sure if it played back. So, if anybody redeems the channel points, let me know. Let's see here. How about this one? Well, that's my reaction in real time, so I guess the delay has kind of got it playing weird. So, I don't know. If you can hear it, let me know. If you can't, I'll fix something, whatever it is. Also did this, so when you type emotes, it does all that. That was supposed to be very simple. It turned out to be the hardest part of the fucking day. But, whatever. We'll see. But yeah, a little study stream. Looks like a lot of people here, but I don't see nobody. I don't know if there's a delay or what that is. Whatever. It says I'm live. If you're live, come on in. Also, everybody who's subbed, you get to play something for free. Figured why not. Alright. So I'm going to do a study stream. This is mostly to test out the new stuff. Let me know if everything's working. But also it's a wake up with me. It was a little late to do one, but I was like, oh, well, I want this shit to go live when I play later. So why not do a study stream and get it going. So this is Wake Up With Me number 89. Let me make sure. Yep. And we're going to be, it's still flop strategy, so we're going to talk about playing in limped pots, and then we're going to move on to 3-bet pots. So let's go. I guess I should click the right thing, huh? Come on there, buddy. There we go.
Now let's discuss limped pots. In the small stakes games, you are very often going to be in limp pots because your opponents do not know what they are doing. They are not playing good, fundamentally sound.
Jonathan Little justifies everything I've been bitching about. I know it's cash games that I've been playing mostly for the past month, or pretty much exclusively, but he just justified every night that I've had where I've been like, these people don't know what the fuck they're doing. In the first sentence he says, people who limp in pots don't know what they're doing. Thank you, Jonathan Little.
Sound poker, as we've discussed in the pre-flop section, they are just limping with hands they want to see the flop with and playing accordingly. However, in the high-stakes games, you may actually find that the absolute best players opt to use a limping strategy, especially when there are payout implications and they don't really want to be all in because they have a medium stack. You may ask, why in the world would a good player want to be limping? Well, essentially, let's go a little bit down the rabbit hole here. If you know that you play good, fundamentally sound poker well in all scenarios, because you've studied it a ton, and you know your opponents play good, fundamentally sound poker as well when facing a pre-flop raise, because they've studied the charts, they know what they look like, right? They're going to play excellent. You don't really have an edge in that game. If you take two good game theory optimal players against each other, and they're playing the exact same strategy, on average, no one wins. So, what should you do? What if you start using a strategy that is very close to the Gto Strategy Pre-Flop, but not quite as good, but it's going to result in your opponents being in abnormal pre-flop and post-flop spots that perhaps they have not studied thoroughly. For example, you limp. Now they don't necessarily know what to do because they don't know what your range looks like, right? but you know what your range looks like, and let's say you can predict how they are going to respond. Now, you are playing this scenario very well, and they're playing this scenario less than well, right?
The standard adjustment for this is to count a limp open by a good player as a raise and 3-bet accordingly, and by a poor player as nothing, as if they are the blinds. So then your open is not a raise. So you just count it like they're not even there. Like they just post it into position, right? So they post it in middle position, and, you know, it just skips by them, so then you get to open. You just don't count it. And I know what he's talking about with the higher level players, but we're talking about guys you see on TV. We're talking about, you know, tip-top pros. So not really something I'm going to be worrying about.
And that's going to result in you having a reasonable post-flop edge. So every once in a while, you'll see a good world-class player opting to do some limping in the high-stakes games. But for the most part, 99.9% of the time, in the small stakes games and medium stakes games, when people are limping, they just want to see the flop with a bunch of nonsense. So when you see the flop with a bunch of nonsense, recognize you need to figure out how nonsense connects with the flop. Also, this section assumes that you limped behind the initial limper with good implied odds hands, like small pairs, medium pairs, suited connectors, suited aces, big cards, right? Because really, you should be raising with your best hands and your blocker hands before the flop. We discussed this earlier in the pre-flop section. Go back and reference that if you have forgot it. So we are going to have hands that flop generally well, which is exactly what you want to have in multi-way pots. Understand that in multi-way pots, you can lose these pots very often and still be profitable because you're risking almost nothing. When you're risking almost nothing, one big blind, you really just don't have to win the 4, 5, 6, 8 big blind pot all that often, right?
To finish the sentence, because when you win them, you win 8 blinds, or whatever it is, 5 blinds, 7 blinds. So you can let them go very easily because, you know, if you win one of these just somewhere down the line, at the minimum, meaning you take one shot in position and they just all fold, you just paid for all those limps behind. And in a lot of times when you get into these pots, they're going to be bigger pots. It's a weird dichotomy where you'll see bigger pots happen with limped pots than you will with raised pots, because the players connect well. So when people improve their hand and what they're looking for, they're more likely to get it in. This is the scenarios where you see flush over flush, set over set, things like that. Even aces versus kings pre-flop, when it goes raise, re-raise, call, if both blind players start out with 100 big blinds in a tournament, you don't always see players getting it all in. You know what I'm saying? Like if the board, because there's not going to be a lot to connect with on the board left. So if the board comes out kind of middling, and then one guy checks, the other guy bets, and then the other guy calls, now they're both kind of in a weird position where they're just trying to get to showdown. But if both players limped, like pocket 5, or pocket 5s, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, maybe some suited hands, and connected well with the board, like made straights and sets and flushes, well, then yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot of money go into those pots. 5-card hands are stronger than one pair, you know, so just something to keep in mind. That's why limping can be profitable. I was trying to combat this incorrectly in the cash games. In tournaments, I do very well with this, and I kind of realized that a few days ago and realized what I was doing wrong, and ended up playing pots that were far too big when the pots should stay small till I'm 100% sure I have the best hand, and then they can blow up, because they blow up very easily.
Understand, stack to pot ratio is
And that doesn't mean that I have the nuts. It means I just have the conceivable best hand.
going to be gigantic. So far, we've been discussing single raise pots, where the pot started on the flop with 5, 6, 7 big blinds, something like that. Now, though, the pot's going to start with fewer big blinds, and you have a deeper stack remaining. Also, minimum defense frequency is going to be very low, because usually in limped pots, people typically bet on the bigger side of the bet sizes we've outlined earlier. And that's because stacks are effectively deeper in relation to the pot. So you're going to be facing bigger bets in general in multi-way pots and in limped pots, right? Well, you're facing bigger bets in limped pots, and very often these will be multi-way as well. And you know in multi-way pots, the minimum defense frequency gets divided by everyone still remaining in the pot. So you're facing bigger bets than normal, and you're going to be multi-way most of the time, so you really don't need to defend very often at all when facing bets in limped pots. All right. When it checks to you, you're going to find that you want to value bet and call raises with your premium made hands a little bit less often. And that's because your opponents can have good hands too. Kind of like in the multi-way section where we discussed you want to be doing a lot of checking from out of position, especially on the coordinated boards, perhaps 100% of the time. Same thing applies here. With your draws, you're going to want to bet and then fold them less often because you have to bet into multiple opponents. So essentially what I mean by this is you want to be betting with draws that don't really have to fold to a raise. So you're going to be bluffing with less like random gut shots, right? If you think back to single raise pots, heads up, very often you're betting with gut shots and backdoor flush draws with overcards, etc. And that's not going to be the case in multi-way pots and in limped pots.
So in limped pots, we're talking about situations where you have the nut flush draw and an overcard. You know what I'm saying? Like you have, the suited ace 5 and it comes out 10 high with 2 hearts or whatever your suit is. And, that's one that you're not going to fold very often if you face a ton of aggression after going for a check raise because the odds are in your favor when you feel like you're up against just one pair. It could be 50-50, but now the pot's laying you better. Open-enders with a flush draw, gut shots with a flush draw, things like that. Just like cards where it's like you're 50-50 or better versus one pair. You're not always going to be up against one pair, but even when you're up against sets, you can still have all your straights and flush outs, So things like that. I think the thing to realize here is it plays like multi-way.
Your marginal made hands are going to be check calling with fewer of them. So if you normally check call with like any pair, maybe you're check calling only middle pair and better, something like that. Depends on the scenario, of course. We're going to look at some examples. And
I have a email that I email myself things to remember. And I emailed this to myself because I saw the limped pots so infrequently, and I actually went back to the emails a couple days ago and looked at them. And I looked at this and I realized this section was in it. And it was because of talking about the limped pot thing, because in playing in tournaments at the levels I play right now, I'm not facing limps ever at all, really. Even on a final table, even on some of the bigger final tables, I'm still not facing limps. So it's so super rare that I wanted to make sure I noted to myself that playing at higher levels, I may face this. And I kind of wrote myself an email as to when to review this for that. Still good stuff, but I'm usually only going to see it in cash games at this level. I think you're really only going to see this in cash games until you're playing tournaments that are more turbo-y, more hyper, and at bigger buy-ins. So like $100 turbos, even, $100 turbos, no. Like 215s and bigger. Then you'll see some of this in the early stages and the very late stages.
And with your junk, you're just check folding way more often due to the low minimum defense frequency. That said, as an exploitative adjustment, if you can figure out your opponents are weak, you should be attacking them. You should be attacking them hard, because that's going to result in them folding out all of their marginal and junky hands, right? So let's say you're on the flop and 4 people limp, you limp the button, flop comes, uncoordinated, let's say king 6-3. They all check to you. If you have any sort of backdoor draw here, it's a pretty reasonable spot to bet, because a lot of people will bet the flop if they have a king or better. So when they don't bet the flop, it implies they have worse than a king. And most people are not going to check call the flop and the turn with a hand worse than a king. So if your opponents play very straightforwardly in limp pots, such that they are not protecting their checking range at all, then you can run them over. So definitely look for scenarios.
This is the gotta bet twice thing again. Because players will call on the flop with a lot of trash. Just for the optimism. And it kind of goes against you. Say, well, if they call on the flop, shouldn't they still call on the turn? Yeah, they should. But most people will not realize that, even getting laid the proper odds, because they only have one card to come and they just don't know where they are. They're just calling to try to get stronger. And that's that gambling, aspect that we're trying not to do.
Like that, as a strong exploitative play. When you're facing a bet, you're going to want to continue using the bet response flowchart with a few adjustments. Mainly, you're rarely going to have the nut advantage. So when you don't have the nut advantage, and when your opponent's nut hands that they should be betting in their polarized strategy also are roughly the same as the hands you would like to be raising, you really just don't want to be raising all that often. That's going to result in you doing a lot of checking and calling or betting and calling.
A rare moment when you would have the nut advantage is if you were playing on a trap and somebody limped in first and you were in second with like pocket aces, right? And if you decided just to limp it behind because you thought somebody else would raise, and then you go to the flop and nobody had raised, and now you flopped aces full. That's one of the rare times you're going to have the nut advantage in a limped pot, because you're going to be raising your good hands in so many scenarios, and there's no way to really define. By your range, you'd have to be in a trapping range already, which a lot of people don't have, especially when we're talking about these examples in here that are 40 big blinds. That's always what these examples are based around, because that's where you live in tournaments. So it's one of those things where that's why so rarely you're going to have the nut advantage, because as ranges line up, there are no real limp ranges unless you're trapping. And very rare that you're not going to see a raise, you know.
Calling in limped pots compared to single raised heads up pots. So whenever you rarely have the nut advantage, you are going to raise infrequently. Because you have the nut advantage, because you lack the nut advantage, you're going to be raising infrequently. All right, let's take a look at a few examples here. Here we have pocket eights, limp, limp, limp. Against a tricky limper here, this is a type of player who will limp and then re-raise you sometimes. I would definitely just limp behind. I believe we discussed this type of thing in the pre-flop section. Flop comes king, 6, 2. This player bets, this player calls. Now, we have a very clear marginal made hand. We have a backdoor flush draw, but it's not particularly good. This is an easy fold. You may say, why are we folding? We have a marginal made hand. Well, under the gun plus one's betting into multiple, or under the gun's betting into multiple people, and this player called. SF limper, straightforward limper. So it's very likely one of these two players has a king, and if they don't have a king, they're gonna have like pocket jacks, or they're gonna have flush draws. So no matter what we're against, we're not in great shape. So fold. Get out of the way. Don't think you have to put chips into the pot. Here we have pocket sevens against a straightforward limper. Limp, limp, limp. I'm often going to just limp here, but if you told me you wanted to raise, I would say that's fine, because we have a lot of pre-flop fold equity. I usually limp in this scenario, though. This time we do raise to 1,300. Remember, 3 times the last bet, plus any additional money in the pot, so 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1,300. That's what I do. Straightforward limper calls. Flop comes queen, 6, 3. So now, we were in a limp pot, but we ended up raising, right? And now, when the opponent checks, you have to ask, who has the range advantage? Who has the nut advantage? This is an interesting scenario because if you try to narrow down the opponent's range, it's going to look like a condensed range most likely, meaning it doesn't have the best pre-flop hands, and it also doesn't have the weaker pre-flop hands, because those often raise pre-flop, although they could have the weaker pre-flop hands like I don't know, king 8 suited, ace 6 suited, jack 9 suited, 9 7 suited, ace 10 offsuit, who knows, right? Who knows how wide it goes. Or it could be a little bit tighter, mostly just like good suited connected hands and good big cards and medium pairs. That said, as their range gets wider, you want to be betting this flop more often, and I think this is a spot I would just bet 100% of the time. And I'm sure if you look at the Gto strategy here, it's going to say to bet this type of hand, pocket sevens or even a 6, because it's probably the best hand, but it's very susceptible to being outdrawn. So this is a spot where I'm definitely going to bet the flop using a small size. We're going to be betting this flop very frequently, and the board's uncoordinated, right? Board's uncoordinated, bet frequently, use a small size. You see how we sort of just like navigated through the range advantage flow chart, right? Where we look, what's our range advantage? Probably have the range advantage. Do we have the nut advantage? Yeah. How does is the range connectivity? How well does the opponent connect with this board? Like, not especially well. Okay, so we bet small, right? And notice, that's just the process I'm always going through when we're in these scenarios, and you need to do that too. So anyway, we bet small, opponent just folds. If they did call, I would check the turn and then check the river. I would probably actually fold to a river bet against a straightforward player if they did bet the river, unless I improved, or the board ran out like really dry. But even if it ran out really dry, I'm still probably going to fold against a straightforward player. All right, pocket sevens again. This time against a tricky limper. This is someone who may limp with good hands and limp re-raise, so now we're definitely not going to raise them. Call, see the flop. This player raises to 1,400. This player calls. We have an easy call here. We're putting in 1,200 to try to win a 5,000 pot, so we're getting 4-to-1 pot odds immediately, right? 3-to-1 pot odds. What are we getting? 3-to-1 pot odds immediately. And also, we can win an additional 10,000 chips. So the way you want to think about this is we're putting in 1,200 to try to win 10,000 plus 4,000. So that's going to be 14,000. So that's giving us about 12 to 13 to 1 implied odds, which is fine. If you're getting something like 10 to 1 implied odds or more, you should be pretty happy calling with most pairs in these scenarios. And 13's more than 10. So we'll
Hey,
stick around.
Casero.
Get a terrible flop, so just check fold.
Glad to see that worked.
Even though we have a draw, it's not a good draw. Just get out of the way. This flop nails the button's range, right? Like absolutely smashes it. So just fold. I think we discussed this hand earlier. Here it went limp, limp. This is a spot where you can certainly check. But
new stuff. Yeah, a lot of new stuff. Check out the... This is my favorite thing because it took me forever. The emote wall. Yeah, so... It was a pain in the ass. For some reason, it just wasn't finalizing for me, and I actually had to redo everything. But yeah, so now when you put an emote in chat, it comes up. There's a whole bunch of sound effects and stuff like that. I don't know how quickly you get points. But yeah, and I'm learning this stuff from the other streamers that I watch that I always end up hosting. That nobody really see. I don't know if you guys like them, but I have fun. And there's a lot of little sound bites and things like this one. Daddy, yes. You know, and I'm gonna come up with a new emote for the for this part that comes up over here. Ta-da! Yeah, there's the ta-da. Yeah. So yeah, it's working. It's fucking working. Holy shit. I still haven't fully curated yet. I just put a whole shit ton of them on there. You can unlock random sub emotes. Stuff like this, the greens that aren't red, I don't know if they're working. Like, this posture check should come up on screen somewhere, but it's not. It's just coming up in the chat. So, I don't know. That I love. I made them cost more or less based on their length and stuff. So I didn't know if you guys ever even got channel points. I had no fucking idea. Apparently I had to certify through Twitch and turn it on and do this whole thing, but I guess everybody's been building channel points and subs are building at 2 times the amount. So gonna have too much fun with this. Yeah, that's the thing, man. I need a little more interaction on the